When the blood of my own father and brother stained my hands, I realized that life is real, instantaneous, and extremely shocking. Before I begin this story that I have kept for decades, let me ask you who are watching me to subscribe to the channel, like this video and comment on which city you are listening to me from. Each comment from you is a hug in the heart of this old lady. My name is Maria das Dores Almeida Santos, but everyone here in Garanhuns, this little piece of Pernambuco, where the cold makes us believe we are not in the northeast, knows me as Dona Dorinhada Place in Ha. I'm 78 years old. My fingers are no longer as nimble as they used to be, my hair is white and I don't even try to dye it anymore, and I have a craft shop that is more of a meeting point for the city's ladies than a business in itself. I was born in 1947, in a mud house, covered with straw in the rural area of Garanhuns, so far from the city that the only car we saw was the priest's, when he came once a month to celebrate mass in the improvised little church under a mango tree. It was a simple house, with dirt floors, no electricity, no running water, but in my first years of life it still felt like a home. There were 6 of us in that cramped house. My father, Jose Almeida, known as Ze Cabellera, because of his thick hair that he never cut properly. My mother Severina, who everyone called Dona Severa, not only because of her name, but because of the hard way that life in the countryside had given her. My 3 older brothers, Antonio, Joaquim, and Pedro, and I, the youngest, the only girl, the one who shouldn't even have a third. As my father made a point of reminding me whenever he drank too much cachaça after working in the fields, my father was a man of his time and place, a man who believed that women were made for 3 things, to work, to give birth and to obey. My mother, poor thing, fulfilled these 3 functions with the resignation of someone who had never known any other reality. She got up before the sun to make coffee, worked in the fields all day alongside her husband and children. I would come home to make dinner, wash clothes in the stream and still carry out the wifely duties that my father demanded, even when she could barely stand up from exhaustion. A self-respecting woman doesn't complain, doesn't cry, and doesn't say no to her husband. She told me as she taught me how to pound the pestle to make flour. I was 8 years old at the time and I thought it was the most natural thing in the world. How could I have known there was another way to live? That not all women accepted being treated as if they were less than people. My brothers, raised in the image and likeness of their father, learned from an early age that women were worth less than men, that the world outside was theirs by right and that at home the final word always belonged to the head of the family. Antonio, the oldest, was the one who most resembled my father, not only in physical appearance, tall, strong, with large, calloused hands, but also in his violent temperament, in the way he looked at women as if they were objects at his disposal. My childhood was divided between hard work on the farm, the domestic chores that my mother taught me, since I could barely reach the wood stove, and the few moments of joy that I found hidden under the JUA tree, reading the old books that the teacher at the rural school lent me. I studied until the 3rd year of primary school, when my father decided that the girl already knew how to read and count enough, and took me out of school to help more at home. Why study more? Are you really going to get married and have children? He would say, closing the subject, as he always did. I cried for days, hiding in the barn, but it was no use. In our house, Ze Cabellera's word was law, and no one, not even my mother, dared to contradict him. It was when I was 14 that things began to change. My girlish body was giving way to womanly curves, even with the little food we had. I began to notice different looks from men when I went to the city market to sell vegetables from our garden. Looks that made me uncomfortable, that seemed to undress me when they touched me. But no look scared me more than the one from my own brother Antonio. He was 22 at the time, already a grown man, working in construction in the city, coming home only on weekends. It was on one of those weekends that I first noticed the way he looked at me when he thought no one was looking. A look that was not that of a brother to a sister, that made my blood run cold in my veins and my heart race with fear. I whispered to my mother, while we were washing clothes in the stream, out of earshot of the men in the house. "That's nonsense, girl. He's your brother. Your blood. Are you imagining things?" was her response, without even looking up from the clothes she was rubbing hard on the stone. But I wasn't imagining it, I knew I wasn't, and I started doing everything I could to never be alone with Antonio, to always have someone close by, to never cross his path when he came back from the city. With the cachaça already going to his head, time went by and the situation at home became increasingly difficult. The drought of 1962 wiped out almost all of our crops. Money, which was already scarce, became even scarcer. And my father's mood, which had never been the best, soured completely. The beatings of my mother, which used to be sporadic, became almost daily, always for the smallest reason. Cold food, poorly ironed clothes, or simply because he needed to take out his anger on someone for seeing life so hard. My dear ones who are with me following along so far, I want to take a break to take a sip of water. If you are enjoying my story, even though it is so sad, leave a like and comment on which city you are watching from. Each of your comments is a ray of sunshine that illuminates the heart of this old lady. It was during this difficult time that my maternal grandmother, Dona Josefa, who lived alone in a small house in the city, began to get sick. My mother, being an only child, was the only one who could take care of her. After much discussion, my father allowed her to spend a few days a week in the city to take care of her sick mother, but only on the condition that I take over all her chores at home. If I can't handle the work, I will get beaten until I learn. He warned me the morning my mother left for the city for the first time, a bundle of clothes under her arm and her eyes full of concern as she left me alone with those men. The first few weeks were a time of adaptation. I would wake up at dawn to make coffee. I would make lunch, dinner, wash, iron, and clean, all under the critical eye of my father and the other of my brother Antonio. My other brothers, Joaquim and Pedro, had already left home by that time, one working cutting sugarcane in Alagoas, the other trying to make a living in Sao Paulo. It was just the three of us in that house that seemed more suffocating every day. It was on a Thursday, the day my mother always went to the city, that what I feared so much happened. I was in the small makeshift bathroom at the back of the house, taking a shower with water that I had carried in buckets from the stream, when I heard the door open. Before I could scream, my brother Antonio's big, calloused hand covered my mouth. "Don't even think about screaming, brat. I've been waiting for a chance like this for a long time," he whispered in my ear, the hot breath of Kashika making me want to vomit. I tried to fight, I tried to struggle, but he was much stronger. The details of what happened in that bathroom are things that I prefer not to tell, that I spent my whole life trying to forget. All I know is that when it was all over, he left, leaving me curled up on the floor, trembling, with a clear threat. "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you and your mother." Tears mixed with the bath water as I tried to wash my body, feeling that I would never be truly clean again. How could I tell anyone? Who would believe me against the word of my eldest son, my father's favorite? And even if they did, what would happen next? In that place, at that time, it was not uncommon for a girl herself to be blamed for provoking men. I spent the night awake, curled up on the mat that served as my bed, a piece of wood hidden under my pillow, trembling at every noise. The next morning, when my father and Antonio left for the fields, I ran to the stream and washed myself again, scrubbing my skin until it was red, as if the water could wash away the shame and disgust I felt. I decided that I would tell my mother everything when she returned on Sunday. Even though I was afraid of the consequences, I couldn't keep it to myself. I couldn't continue living under the same roof as my attacker, without any protection. But fate, which had already been so cruel to me, decided to deal me another blow. On Saturday at night, while I was preparing dinner, my father arrived with the news. My grandmother had gotten much worse. She was in the last hours of her life. My mother would not be returning on Sunday as planned. She would stay in the city until the end, until the funeral, perhaps for another whole week. That news was like a bucket of cold water. Another week alone in that house, another week at the mercy of those men. I cried silently as I stirred the pot of beans, the tears falling straight into the thick broth, without anyone noticing. It was that night, after my father and Antonio had drunk almost an entire bottle of Kashika and were snoring loudly in their hammocks, that I began to plan. I could not go on like this. I would not survive another week in that house. Not the way it was. I needed to protect myself, and if no one would do it for me, I would have to do it myself. Sunday was bath day for them, always together, to save water, taking advantage of the buckets that I filled from the stream. It was the time when they would be most vulnerable, without the knives that they normally carried at their waists, without clothes, without the possibility to easily chase me if I achieved what I was planning. My father kept a sharp machete that he used to cut sugarcane. He knew where it was. He also knew how to use it. It wasn't the first time he had picked up a heavy tool. He had helped on the farm for as long as I could remember. He had strong arms, despite his thinness. He knew how to handle that blade. As I planned every detail that night, unable to sleep, with my heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to come out of my mouth, something inside me changed. I was no longer that frightened girl, paralyzed by fear. I had a different strength, a cold determination that I had never felt before. I would survive at any cost. That night I made my decision. It was them or me. And it wouldn't be me. I spent the entire Sunday pretending to be normal. I made coffee, served it without looking them in the eye, prepared lunch, washed the dishes. Every minute was agony. Every second brought me closer to what I needed to do. Fear mixed with a cold determination that I had never felt before. As the sun began to set, I filled the buckets for I took them to the bathroom, as I always did. But this time there was something different. The knife my father used to cut sugarcane, the one he always kept sharp as a razor, was not in the corner of the kitchen where it usually was. It was hidden inside the bathroom, under one of the buckets. What happened in that bathroom changed my life forever. I am not proud of it, but I do not regret it either. I did what I had to do to survive. When I was done, there were 2 fewer lives in that house and blood on my hands as a girl who would never be a girl again. I cleaned everything carefully. I washed the knife in the stream, scrubbed the bathroom floor, dragged the bodies to the hole my father had started to dig for a cistern. I covered everything with earth, stones, dry branches. The moon was my only witness. Before dawn, I was already on the road with a small bundle containing my few clothes and the money I found hidden in the kerosene can. I walked all night to the city, where my mother was keeping watch over my grandmother's body. I rehearsed every word during that journey. Walking. What would I say? How would I explain the sudden disappearance of the 2 men from the house? The story I made up was simple. I had heard them talking about going to the gold mines in Para, where they said there was gold. Then they had a big fight and left, each on their own. At that time, it was common for men to abandon their families in search of a better life, of fortunes that they almost never found. When I got to my grandmother's house, I found my mother sitting next to the body, her eyes swollen from crying so much. She saw me arrive and opened her arms, without the strength to ask why I was there. They left, my mother said simply when she finally asked about my father and brother. They had a big fight and left. She felt she had no energy to ask any more questions. The mourning for her own mother consumed all her strength. Maybe deep down she even felt relief. Who can say? My grandmother was buried the next day. A simple coffin, a wooden cross, few people to say goodbye. After the burial, I looked at my mother and saw a woman broken by life. We could not go back to that house in the middle of nowhere, with its terrible memories and buried secrets. What now, Mom? Where do we go? I asked, holding her hand, feeling the hard calluses from years of working in the fields. We'll stay here, she replied, looking at the small adobe house my grandmother had left behind. This house is ours now. We started over again. And so it was. In the following weeks, we adapted our life to the city. My mother washed clothes for the wealthier families. I helped clean the houses. We slept on a mattress on the living room floor. We ate what we could buy with the little money we earned. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over our heads, away from those ghosts. But the ghosts, my dears, sometimes follow us even when we think we've left them behind. At night, when I closed my eyes, I saw that scene again. The machete, the blood, their eyes as life ebbed away. I woke up screaming, in a cold sweat, feeling the metallic smell of blood, as if it were still on my hands. My mother thought it was longing, that she was crying for her father and brother who had left. They'll come back one day, my dear, she would say, trying to console me. When they make money from the mines, they'll come back for us. How could I tell the truth? How could I destroy the last hope she had? Then I would swallow my tears, nod my head and carry my secret in silence, like a tumor growing inside me. It was at that time that I began to hope. At first, I thought it was just the flu, but the cough wouldn't go away. I would have a fever at night, with a fatigue that seemed to drain all my strength. My mother, already weakened by the loss of her own mother, was now consumed with worry about me. It's just the flu, I repeated, trying not to worry her anymore. Tomorrow I'll be better, but I didn't get better. The cough got worse. I started to sweat so much at night that I woke up with the mattress wet. I lost so much weight that my ribs showed through my thin skin. The doctor in town, called by one of my mother's employers, who saw my condition, diagnosed tuberculosis, probably contracted during the days I spent by my dying grandmother's side. My loves who are listening to me, you have already received news that seemed like the end of the world, a diagnosis that was almost a death sentence. At that time, tuberculosis was a serious matter, especially for a poor girl from the countryside, without the resources for proper treatment. Let us know in the comments if you have ever gone through a similar ordeal or know someone who has faced a serious illness. Knowing that we are not alone in our struggles helps us carry the burden. We need to put her in a sanatorium. The doctor told my mother. There is no proper treatment here. In Sao Paulo, perhaps Sao Paulo was like another world to us. A distant, gigantic city, full of tall buildings and people too rushed to take care of two poor girls from the northeast. But it was also our only chance. I will not let my daughter go alone, my mother declared with a firmness that I had not seen in her for a long time. If she goes, I'll go with her. That's how, 6 months after leaving the countryside with blood on my hands and a heavy secret in my heart, I found myself on an endless bus journey to Sao Paulo. The cough tore at my chest, the fever came and went, sometimes so high that I became delirious. My mother, sitting next to me, held my hand as if she could anchor me to life, just with that touch. We had little money, almost no luggage, just the address of a distant compatriot who had migrated years before and, according to what they said, had done well in the capital of Sao Paulo. He was the brother of a neighbor in town, a man we didn't even know very well. Our only hope in a huge, indifferent city. When we arrived at the bus station in Sao Paulo, it was already night. A cold and humid night, so different from the hot and dry nights in the backlands. My mother, who had never left the interior of Pernambuco, looked in fear at the tall buildings, the lights, the crowd moving hurriedly around us. Luckily, that fellow countryman came to pick us up. Mr. Manuel, a middle-aged man with a northeastern accent, already deluded by his years in the capital, took us to a small room at the back of his house, on the outskirts. The next day, he helped find the sanatorium. Got the papers for my admission. He even lent my mother money to rent a room in a nearby boarding house. The Santa Isabel Sanatorium would be my home for the next 9 months. A sad place, with grey walls and the smell of disinfectant, where the constant sound of coughs and groans of pain was only interrupted by the siren announcing mealtimes or bedtime. Lying there on a narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling day after day, I began to relive that afternoon in the country bathroom, not just with guilt or fear, but with a strange sense of detachment, as if it had happened to someone else. Visits were only allowed on Sundays, for half an hour. My mother never missed anything. She always arrived bringing some fruit, a biscuit, any small treat she could buy with the money she earned as a maid in a family home. He sat beside my bed, held my hand, which was getting thinner and more transparent every day, and told me stories about the big city, about things he had seen, about people he had met. How are my father and brother? Have they sent any news yet? She would always ask, her feverish eyes fixed on my face, as if she could extract the truth from me with just a look. Not yet, Mom. I replied, looking away, pretending to adjust the sheet. But they will send it soon. The mining is far away. The letters take a long time to arrive. It was a necessary lie. I told myself. A lie to protect her, to give her a little hope in those difficult days. Sometimes I found myself making up elaborate details, that they had found gold, that they were raising money to come find us, that we would all be together again soon. Lies that came out of my mouth so naturally that sometimes I almost believed them. 3 months after my hospitalization, my mother began to show the first signs of the disease. The same cough, the same fever, the same tiredness. By taking care of me, by sleeping in the same room when I was at my most contagious, she had contracted tuberculosis. Well, he tried to hide the symptoms at first. He would twist to the side, hide the sweat on his forehead, saying it was hot, explain his increasing thinness, saying he was saving on food to bring me more fruit. But I knew those signs. I had lived each of them in my own skin. Mom, you need to get treatment, I said on one of those Sunday visits, seeing how weak she was, barely able to sit still. Go to the doctor, please. Nonsense, daughter, it's just the flu. It will soon pass. She responded, using the same words I had used months before, but it didn't go through. The following week he didn't come to visit me, nor the week after that. When I finally received news, it was through Mr. Manuel. My mother had also been admitted to another ward in the same sanatorium. For weeks I begged to see her. The nurses said it wasn't possible, that I was still too weak to walk to the other ward, which the rules didn't allow. Until one day one of them, Dona Carmelita, a woman from the northeast like us, who had seen something in my eyes that moved her, broke the rules. In the dead of night, he helped me walk down the cold hallway, took me to my mother's bed. What I saw broke my heart. My mother, always so strong, despite everything, was unrecognizable, thin, to the point of looking like nothing more than bones covered by a thin layer of skin. Her hair, which already had a few white strands when we left Pernambuco, was now completely grey, her eyes sunken in their sockets, shining with the fever that was consuming her. "My daughter," she whispered when she saw me trying to reach up to touch my face. "Forgive your mother for not taking care of you properly." "I don't have to forgive," I replied, holding that hand that had worked so hard, that had suffered so much and that was now so light that it felt like it would break between my fingers. "You always did everything for me. Now it's time to rest a little." We stayed like that for a few minutes in silence, just looking at each other, until she said something that chilled my blood. "I know what happened in that bathroom, daughter. I know." My heart stopped for a second. Did she really know? Had he somehow discovered the truth? Or was it just the fever delirium talking? "What are you talking about, Mom?" I asked. The trembling voice, the racing heart. "From the bathroom, from the machete, from the blood," she whispered, her glazed eyes fixed on some point beyond my shoulder, as if she saw something I couldn't see. "I saw everything. In a dream, I saw you." Tears streamed down my face as I held his hand. Unable to deny, unable to confirm. She knew. Somehow, through the mysteries that bind mothers and daughters, she had seen the truth. They deserved it. She continued. The voice just a breath. "I know what Antonio did to you. I always knew I would do it one day. He was just like his father." I hugged her tightly, sobbing openly now, not caring about the other patients sleeping around. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. She knew and did not condemn me. She knew and understood. "I'm sorry, Mom," I whispered between sobs. "I'm sorry for not telling you, for lying to you." "I don't have to forgive, daughter," she said, her voice growing weaker. "You did what I never had the courage to do. You freed yourself. Now you need to live. Life for both of us." Those were his last words. The next morning, I received the news that Dona Severina had passed away during the night alone, with no one to hold her hand in that final moment. The burial was simple. Just me, who had special permission to leave the sanatorium for a few hours, Mr. Manuel, and the grave digger. A cheap coffin, a shallow grave in the cemetery on the outskirts, some wild flowers that Mr. Manuel found along the way. There was no money for more. There were no relatives to share the costs or the pain. I returned to the sanatorium that same day, more alone than ever. At 17 years old I had lost everything. Father, mother, brothers, home. There was nowhere to go back to. I had no one to turn to. He only had a heavy secret and tuberculosis that was slowly giving way to medication. But in my mother's last words I found a kind of absolution. She knew and understood. She hadn't condemned me, she had asked me to live, to move forward, to find a different path than the one she had. It was this request, this last wish of hers that gave me the strength to fight the disease, to cling to life when it would have been so easy to simply give up. In moments of greatest despair, when the fever made me delirious and the pain in my chest was almost unbearable, I remembered her words. "Now you need to live. Live for both of us." And so I did, my dears, so I did. I was discharged from the sanatorium months after entering. I had lost so much weight that my clothes looked like they belonged to someone else. In the mirror I saw an old girl with sunken eyes and skin stretched over visible bones, but she was alive. I had survived and carried a silent promise made to my mother on her deathbed. Live the life she never had the chance to live. Mr. Manuel, the fellow countryman who welcomed us when we arrived in Sao Paulo, helped me with my first steps outside the hospital. He found a small room at the back of his house for me to stay in until I found work and could support myself. "You can't go back to the country, girl," he said. "Tuberculosis can come back if you don't take proper care of yourself. Stay here and start a new life." That made sense, not only because of my fragile health, but because there was nothing left, no one waiting for me in Pernambuco. Only painful memories and two bodies buried in a distant backyard. I started working as a maid in the house of an Italian family in Bigziga. Dona Leonor, my boss, was an elderly lady who had lived alone since her husband died and her children had returned to Portugal. A strict but fair woman, who didn't care about my heavy accent or my lack of experience in large houses in the city. I can see in her eyes that she already carries too much sadness for someone so young. She told me on the first day, "Here you will find hard work, but also respect." And so it was. I worked from Monday to Saturday, from 7 in the morning to 6 in the evening, with only an hour for lunch. The salary was low, but it included meals and a roof over my head. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a new beginning. Little by little I learned to live with my secret. Nightmares still came, but less frequently. My hands no longer shook when I saw a machete or other sharp object. The guilt, that one thing, never completely left me. Not for what I had done. I never regretted that, but for the price my mother ended up paying. If I hadn't done what I did, if we had continued that miserable life, maybe she wouldn't have contracted tuberculosis. Maybe she would still be alive. These thoughts haunted me on lonely nights in the maid's room at the back of Donna Leonore's house. Those of you who have been listening to me up until now, my dears, know what it's like to carry a self on your back, like a weight that can never be lifted, that weighs more on some days, less on others, but is always there. Tell me in the comments if you've ever been through something similar and where you are watching this video from. Knowing that there are people listening to me from every corner of this country warms my heart. It was on a Sunday, my only day off, that my life really started to change. I was in Ibarapura Park, sitting on a bench watching the families walking with their children, couples holding hands. A whole life that seemed so far from my reality. A boy was playing soccer with his friends nearby. At one point, the ball slipped away and landed at my feet. When I got up to return it, our eyes met. He smiled a simple smile, with no ulterior motives, just a silent thank you. Something in that look, a kindness, a sincere curiosity, touched me in a way I had never felt before. "Thank you," he said, picking up the ball. He hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to say something more, but his friends called him back to the game. The following Sunday, I went back to the same park. I sat on the same bench. I didn't admit it to myself, but I expected to see him again. And he appeared, this time alone, walking slowly, as if he was in no hurry or commitment. "You were here last week," he said, stopping near my bench. It wasn't a question, but an observation. "You too," I replied, feeling my face blush. "Carlos," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Maria dos Dores," I said, shaking his hand quickly, unaccustomed to that kind of contact. "But everyone calls me Doran. We started talking shyly that day and then met by chance on the following Sundays. Carlos was the son of migrants from the Northeast like me, but he had been born in Sao Paulo. He worked as a delivery man at a local pharmacy. He dreamed of having his own business one day. He had kind eyes and strong hands that never tried to touch me without permission. Little by little, in Sunday meetings that became a ritual, I began to open up. I told him about my childhood in the Backlands, about my mother who had died of tuberculosis, about my brothers who had gone their own way. I talked about the drought, the poverty, the hardships, but I never mentioned the bathroom, I never talked about the machete, I never talked about the bodies buried in the backyard, not because I didn't trust Carlos, who showed himself every Sunday to be a different man from everyone I had ever met. But why are some things too big, too heavy to share even with the ones we love? Because yes, little by little I discovered that I was in love with him, the way he was. Calm way of speaking, by the way he really listened to me when I told him something, by the simple, honest dreams he had. It was a love unlike anything I had ever known, without fear, without violence, without that constant feeling of being watched like prey. In the first months, every touch, every closeness made me stiffen, unconsciously waiting for the pain that always came after. But the pain never came, only affection, only respect, only a genuine affection that I slowly learned to accept. To trust. Our first kiss happened 6 months after that first meeting in the park. We were sitting on a bench in Parque da República, watching the pigeons fight over bread crumbs. Carlos turned to me, asked permission with his eyes before coming closer. It was a shy, brief kiss, but it made my heart race like never before. When we separated, I saw concern in his eyes. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, noticing my hands shaking. I didn't answer, trying to control my breathing. It's just that he had never been like this before. So gentle, respectful, as if I mattered. He held my hands between his, without force, just a firm and reassuring touch. Do you matter, Doran-ha? Much more than you can imagine. At that moment, sitting on that park bench with a man who really saw me, who really respected me, who really cared, I felt something snap inside me, as if an old wound that had healed wrong was finally being opened and starting to heal in the right way. We cried lying on my bed after the first failed attempts at physical intimacy. Carlos never pressured me, never showed impatience, he just held me while I sobbed, releasing pain that I didn't even know I still had. When I finally managed to give myself completely to him, months later, it was like rediscovering my own body, no longer as a battlefield marked by violations and pain, but as a place of pleasure, connection, and calm. We dated for 2 years before getting married. A simple ceremony at the registry office, followed by a lunch at his mother's house with the few relatives and friends we had. There was no white dress, no party, no family to walk me down the aisle, just a light blue dress bought in installments, a bouquet of daisies that Carlos brought as a surprise and a thin silver ring on my finger. We moved to a small apartment in Ipiranga, not far from Carlos' mother's house. Only 2 rooms, but ours. A place where no ghosts visited us, where we could build new memories, good memories, which would gradually replace the bad ones. It was at this time that I started studying again, taking night classes twice a week, after work at Dona Leonor's house. Carlos encouraged me, helped me with my homework, celebrated each small achievement as if it were a great achievement. You have the potential to do much more than just clean other people's houses. He would tell me when I doubted my ability. One day you'll go to college, you'll be a respected professional, you'll help other people who have gone through what you went through. At that time I thought he was dreaming too big. How could a poor, semi-literate girl from the Northeast get so far? But Carlos believed in me with such unshakable certainty that little by little I began to believe in him too. I studied with fierce dedication. Every free minute was spent with books, notebooks, exercises. When I finished my high school education, 3 years later, I had the best grades in the class. The teacher took me aside after graduation. Do you have potential, Doran-ha? She said, adjusting her glasses on her thin nose. You should keep studying. Those words, so similar to the ones Carlos had been repeating for years, finally found fertile ground. The following week, I looked for information about a nursing technical course that accepted scholarship students. It's perfect for you, Carlos exclaimed when I told him about the course. You who have suffered so much with illness will be able to help others not to suffer the same way. There was a symmetry in this that seemed right. I, who had known so much pain, could learn to alleviate it in others. There was a kind of redemption in this path that now opened up before me. I prepared for the selection test for months. I studied after work, on weekends, in every free minute. Carlos helped me by asking questions while I washed the dinner dishes. It was a huge effort. And when the results came out, I could hardly believe it. I had passed in 3rd place. The course would last 2 years, with classes in the morning and an internship in the afternoon. I had to quit my job at Dona Leonor's house, which meant tightening my already tight budget even further. Carlos took on more overtime at the pharmacy. I started doing sewing work at night to supplement my income. It was years of hardship, of sacrifice, but I never gave up. I regretted it. It was during my nursing studies, caring for patients with stories as painful as mine, that I began to better understand what had happened in that bathroom so many years ago. It wasn't just about revenge, about repaying in kind the violence I had suffered. It was about survival, about doing what needed to be done to continue existing. In basic psychology classes, I learned about trauma, about defense mechanisms, about how the mind processes devastating events. I began to see my past not just as a sequence of horrors, but as a journey of survival. Against all odds. Gradually, the weight of that secret became lighter. Not because I forgot. I never forgot what happened in that bathroom. I never forgot the bodies buried in the backyard. But because I began to forgive that 16-year-old girl who had no choice, who did what she did to stay alive. My secret stayed with me. I never told Carlos, I never told anyone after my mother left. Not because I was afraid of being judged. Over time, I learned that what people think of me matters less than what I think of myself. But because some stories are ours to carry, some scars are marks of battles we fight alone. Carlos would sometimes notice my distant gaze when something reminded me of those days. A news story in the newspaper, a similar case during my internship, the smell of wet earth after the rain. In those moments, he would simply hold my hand without asking questions, respecting the silence I asked for. It was one of the many reasons why I loved him more and more each day. When I graduated as a nursing technician at the age of 22, I felt that I had finally found my path. Working in the same hospital where I had taken the course, caring mainly for women and children, I discovered that my own pain could be transformed into compassion, understanding, and concrete help for those who needed it. I developed a special sensitivity to recognize the signs of abuse and violence that many tried to hide. I knew how to identify the look of a woman who lived in fear inside her own home, because it was the same look I saw in the mirror throughout my adolescence. I recognized in children the same behaviors that I had adopted to survive, the way they flinched when someone raised their voice, the way they jumped at the slightest unexpected touch. I was often the first to notice that falling down the stairs was actually a punch, that those playful bruises were actually signs of something much worse. In the 70s, these things were still treated as family problems that no one should interfere in. But I intervened discreetly, offering information, offering a word of support, sometimes just a look that said, "I know, I understand, you are not alone." Each woman I managed to help, each child I managed to protect, was as if I was saving a little bit of myself, as if through them I could give the girl I was the help I never had. The perfect plan, after all, had not been just that of a Sunday afternoon in the backlands, with the machete hidden under a bucket. The perfect plan was this: to survive, to rebuild, to transform pain into purpose. It was to use the scars not as reminders of what hurt me, but as maps to help others find their own way out of hell. While many plans in life fail, this, the most unlikely of all, was working. Every day, every month, every year, I moved a little further away from that house of that bathroom, those ghosts. Not because of forgetfulness, but because of growth. Like a tree that, planted in poor soil, finds the strength to grow toward the sun. Its roots are always firm in the earth that saw it grow, but its branches grow higher and higher, seeking the light. When I finished my nursing course, my life finally seemed to be getting back on track. I was married to a good man, I had a respectable profession, a roof over my head, but inside I still carried that weight. It was no longer a crushing stone like in the early years, but a constant presence, like a shadow that lengthens or shortens depending on the light, but never completely disappears. I worked mainly with women and children in the hospital. It wasn't a conscious choice at first, but over time I realized that it was where I felt most useful, where I could really make a difference. I had a special ability to identify the signs that no one else noticed. The way a woman flinched when her husband entered the room, the way a child looked away when their father or uncle was mentioned. "How do you know?" she once asked Dr. Roberto, the head of pediatrics, after I identified signs of abuse in a girl everyone thought was just shy and clumsy. "How can you see what no one else can see?" I recognized the look, I replied simply. "I've seen him in the mirror many times." The doctor did not insist, respecting my silence about my own past, but from that day on, he began to call me whenever he suspected similar cases. Over time, I became a kind of reference in the hospital for this type of situation. It was 1975, a time when domestic violence was still treated as a private problem, when child abuse was often ignored or minimized. There were no women's police stations, there were no specific laws to protect victims, there was no social awareness that we have today, even if it is still imperfect. In the midst of this scenario, I started doing what I could with the limited resources I had. He spoke privately with the women he identified as victims. It offered information about shelters that were beginning to appear in the city. Sometimes he would hide a patient in the hospital ward for longer than necessary, just to give her a few days of peace while he tried to find a way out. It wasn't much, but for some it was the difference between life and death. For many, it was the first time someone had said, "I believe you," when they told their stories. It was in one of these patients that I saw myself reflected as if in a mirror distorted by time. Joanna, a fictitious name we used in the records to protect her, was 15 years old when she arrived at the hospital with serious injuries. Her father and older brother claimed she had fallen down the stairs, but the bruises, in different stages of healing, told another story. When I finally managed to speak to her alone, I saw in her eyes the same terror I knew so well, the same certainty that no one would believe her, that nothing would change, that the only escape would be her death or theirs. "I know what's happening," he said, holding her hand carefully so as not to press on the bruises. "And I want you to know that you have a choice, there is a way out." She looked at me like I had just spoken in another language. Something completely incomprehensible. The idea of choice, of leaving, seemed an alien concept to someone who lived imprisoned by fear and violence. In the days that followed, while I was caring for her physical wounds, I also began to work on the invisible ones that were harder to heal. I spoke to her whenever possible, telling her stories of other women who had managed to escape, who had rebuilt their lives. I never mentioned my own story, but it was there between the lines, in the conviction with which I said, it is possible to start over. Loves who have been with me until now, do you know what it is like to see someone find hope after so much time in the dark? It is like watching a flower wither, which suddenly, with a little water and light, begins to bloom again. If this story is touching your heart, leave a comment telling me where you are watching me from. Knowing that I am not alone in telling these difficult memories gives me the strength to continue. Joanna stayed in the hospital for almost 2 months, much longer than necessary for her physical injuries. Dr. Roberto, understanding the situation, helped with the paperwork, inventing complications that would justify the prolonged hospitalization. We used this time to organize a way out for her, a shelter for women in the interior of Sao Paulo, new documents, the chance to start from scratch, far from those who hurt her. The night before she left, we sat in the small garden of the hospital, looking at the stars that were barely visible because of the city lights. How will I know? Am I doing the right thing? She asked. Her voice was still fragile, but with a hint of determination that hadn't been there when she arrived. You never know, I answered honestly. We never know if our choices are right until long after we make them. But I know that staying where I was not an option. Any different path is already a step towards liberation. The next day, I accompanied Joanna to the bus station. Social worker, none of them could go. The case had not been officially reported to the police, as was rarely the case in those days. So it was just me, a nursing technician, going beyond my duties, risking my job to make sure that little girl got to the shelter safely. While we were waiting for the bus, she held my hand tightly. Is everything going to be okay? He asked, fear and hope fighting in his eyes. Go, I replied, trying to convey more certainty than I felt. It will take time, it will hurt, there will be days when you will want to go back, but one day you will wake up and realize that you are free, that you survived, that you won. When the bus left, taking Joanna to her new life, I stood on the platform for a long time. Something had changed inside me. A door that I had kept locked for years, guarding my darkest secrets, had opened just a crack, letting in a little light. That night was a turning point. I came home different. Carlos noticed immediately. Did something happen? She asked as I prepared dinner, quieter than usual. Yes, I replied without going into details, but it was something good, something important. He didn't insist. It was one of the qualities I loved most about him. I knew how to respect my silences, my spaces, my shadows. After that night at the bus station, something woke up in me. It wasn't enough to help the occasional woman who, by chance, crossed my path at the hospital. It was necessary to do more, reach more people, change the system that allowed so many Joannas to remain trapped in situations of violence and despair. I started studying for the entrance exam. At 25 years old, with only a high school diploma and a technical course completed, the idea of going to university seemed absurd. But Carlos, as always, supported me unconditionally. If anyone can do it, it's you. He said it on nights when I almost gave up when faced with the mountain of material to study after a full day of work. I took the entrance exam for psychology at USP. On the morning of the test, my hands were shaking so much that I could barely hold the pencil. I looked around and saw only young people aged 17, 18, most of them middle class, who had studied at good schools, taken preparatory courses, prepared their whole lives for that moment. And I, from the Northeast, poor, older, with fragmented education and a story that no one there could imagine. When the results came out, Carlos was more nervous than me. He checked the list of approved candidates 3 times before believing it. You did it, Doran. You did it. It was 1973. I entered college to study psychology as the oldest student in my class, the only married woman, the only one who worked full-time while studying. I had colleagues who were daughters of doctors, lawyers, businessmen, girls who had never had to work a day in their lives. At first, I felt like a fish out of water, out of place in that academic environment that seemed made for a type of people that didn't include people like me. But I soon discovered that my life experience, so different from theirs, was actually my greatest strength. As we learned about trauma, violence, and resilience, I wasn't just absorbing theoretical concepts, I was giving scientific names to things I knew firsthand. This gave me a deeper understanding, an ability to make connections that many colleagues, with all their academic preparation, were unable to make. During my 5 years of college, I kept my job at the hospital, now no longer as a nursing technician, but as an assistant in the newly created hospital psychology department. It was a new, little explored field, and I was on the front line, helping to define protocols and establish service parameters. The hard work paid off. I graduated in 1978, at age 32. At the graduation ceremony, while receiving my diploma, I looked for Carlos in the audience. He was there in the front row, applauding with such pride that he felt like he was going to explode. Beside him, in my imagination, I saw my mother's face, smiling that serene smile of her last moments. "You achieved what I never could. Be free," she had said. And I was finally truly free. Free from fear, free from shame, free from the crushing weight of secrecy. Not because I had forgotten what happened in that bathroom, I never forgot that, but because I had transformed that pain into purpose, that darkness into light, to guide others who were still lost in the shadows. I began working as a clinical psychologist, specializing in trauma and violence. I continued working at the hospital now as part of the official clinical staff, but I also opened a small office where I mainly treated women and children who were victims of violence. In the early 1980s, with the country beginning to emerge from dictatorship, social movements gaining strength, and discussions about women's rights emerging with more vigor, I found space and a voice to take this work beyond the confines of the office and the hospital. I started giving lectures in schools, neighborhood associations, and churches. Talked about domestic violence, about child abuse, about how to recognize the signs, about where to seek help. In the beginning, I faced resistance. People didn't want to hear about these unpleasant matters. But little by little, very little by little, things began to change. In 1982, together with other women, psychologists, social workers, and lawyers, I founded the first shelter for victims of domestic violence in our region. A safe place where women and their children could stay temporarily while they rebuilt their lives. We struggled for years to get funding, we faced threats from violent men who wanted their wives back. We had to change our address several times for security reasons, but we never gave up. Carlos, as always, was by my side every step of the way, even when work took up so much of my time that we barely saw each other, even when I received threats over the phone from angry husbands whose wives I had helped escape. He never suggested I stop, never complained, never made me choose between my purpose and our marriage. "What you do is too important," he said when I felt guilty about spending so much time away from home. "It's saving lives." How could I ask him to stop? We didn't have children. Tuberculosis had left its mark on my reproductive system, making pregnancy impossible. At first, this deeply saddened me, but over time I realized that perhaps it was part of the greater plan of the universe. The dozens of children I have helped over the years, who I have temporarily taken in at the shelter, who I have seen grow and recover from trauma, have in some ways become my daughters and sons. True liberation, I have realized over the years, did not come on the night I buried those bodies in the backyard of the Tapa house. That was just the first step, necessary but insufficient. True liberation came gradually with each woman I helped find her own way out of hell, with each child who was able to smile again after so much suffering. True liberation came when I understood that my story, no matter how painful, did not define me, that I could use it not as a chain that tied me to the past, but as a tool to build a better future for myself and others. That the greatest revenge against those who tried to destroy me was not to kill them, but to live fully, to love deeply, and to help others do the same. I never saw Joanna again after that night at the bus station. But years later, we received a young mother at the shelter who was fleeing her abusive husband. As she told her story, she mentioned the nurse who had helped her escape from her father and brother's home years before, who had given her the courage to believe that she deserved a better life. She said that one day I would wake up and realize that I was free, that I had survived, that I had won, she said, holding her little son in her arms. And she was right. That's why I'm here now, seeking help again, because I know I can start over again. At that moment, I understood that liberation is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process, that sometimes we need to free ourselves several times throughout our lives, from the different prisons we find ourselves in, and that each time we become a little stronger, a little wiser, a little freer. The frightened girl in the bathroom had finally found peace, not through forgetting, not through denial, but through transformation. What happened that night never stopped being part of my story, but it stopped being my whole story. It became just a painful chapter, yes, but not the final one, in a much larger story of resilience, of purpose, of true liberation. And that, my dears, is the greatest victory we can have over our tormentors. Not allowing them to have the last word on who we are and who we can become. The 80s were a period of great transformation in Brazil and in my life. The country was slowly emerging from the military dictatorship, social movements were gaining strength, and I was consolidating my work as a psychologist and activist for women's rights. Our shelter for victims of domestic violence became a reference in the region, serving dozens of women and children each year. In 1985, when the National Council for Women's Rights was created, I was invited to participate in a working group that would develop proposals for public policies aimed at combating violence against women. It was the first time that the Brazilian state officially recognized the need to address this issue. For me, who had started out alone, helping one woman at a time in the hospital, it was almost unbelievable that I was now participating in discussions that could change the lives of thousands. The meetings took place in Brasilia, and on each trip Carlos would take me to the airport, always with that proud smile that never diminished over the years. My wife, the doctor. He joked as he carried my suitcase. Who would have thought that shy girl from the park would change Brazil? He was exaggerating, of course. No, I was changing Brazil all by myself. I was just one voice among many, a worker building a future where women and children would no longer have to fear their own homes. But each small victory, a new law passed, a women's police station opened, a protection program implemented, brought a satisfaction I never imagined I could feel. In 1988, with the new constitution, we felt a breath of hope. Equality between men and women was finally enshrined in the constitutional text. It was just paper, we knew that, but it was an important piece of paper, a formal recognition of something we had been fighting for so long. My loves who have followed the story up to this point, can you imagine what it's like to see a cause you've dedicated your entire life to finally start to be recognized? It's like planting a tree and after decades of watering it in dry soil, seeing the first fruits appear. If you're feeling emotional about this journey, leave your heart in the comments. I really want to know where you are watching me from. In the 90s, I expanded my field of work even further. In addition to clinical care, I also work with after working at the hospital and managing the shelter. I began teaching training courses for professionals who worked with victims of violence, police officers, social workers, nurses, and teachers. Passing on the knowledge I had acquired in practice, transforming pain into learning, was a way of multiplying the impact of my work. It was at this time that I received an invitation that would change the course of my life once again. The University of São Paulo was setting up a research center on violence against women and children, and they wanted me to be part of it as a consultant, bringing my practical experience to dialogue with academic research. At first, I hesitated. I didn't have a master's or doctorate, just a degree in psychology and years of field experience. How could I contribute in such an academically rigorous environment? They're calling you precisely for that, Carlos argued, for your experience, for having experienced firsthand what most people there only know from books. And he was right, as he usually was. My practical experience was valued as a different but equally valid form of knowledge. I taught classes, participated in research, and helped develop care protocols that were implemented in hospitals and police stations all over the country. Working at the center made me realize the importance of documenting the knowledge I had acquired over the years. In 2003, at the age of 57, I published my first book, Breaking the Silence, a practical manual for identifying and intervening in cases of domestic violence. It was not an academic treatise full of technical terms, but a simple guide, written in accessible language, aimed at teachers, health professionals, social workers, anyone who could be the first line of defense for women and children at risk. To my surprise, the book had a much greater reach than I expected. It was used in training courses, translated into Spanish and distributed in other Latin American countries. I received invitations to give international lectures, to do consultancy work, to participate in global forums on the subject. Carlos, already retired from pharmacy, accompanied me on many of these trips. I never imagined I would visit Paris, he said as we walked hand in hand through the streets of the City of Light, where I had been invited to a conference on human rights. The girl, who once dreamed of learning to read to escape the brutal reality of the countryside, now traveled the world sharing knowledge, influencing public policies, and helping to build international networks to protect victims. Sometimes life takes such unexpected paths that they seem unbelievable. Looking back at the journey I took from the Tapa house in the backlands to university auditoriums in Europe, from an abused girl to a woman recognized for her work defending other victims, I barely recognize that frightened child I once was. The transformation did not happen overnight. It was a long, painful process, at times, of constant rebuilding, of learning to trust again, to love again, to believe that I deserved good things in life, of transforming anger into fuel for change, fear into motivation for protection, pain into compassion. Carlos was fundamental in this process. Our marriage, which lasted more than 50 years, was a partnership in the deepest sense of the word. He never tried to save me. I knew I had to do this for myself, but you were always there, offering your support, your love, your unconditional understanding. Even in the moments when I couldn't understand myself, he was there holding my hand in the dark, walking beside me. I never had the courage to tell him the whole truth about what happened in that bathroom, about the bodies buried in the backyard. Not for fear of his judgment. If there was anyone in the world who wouldn't judge me, it was Carlos. But because some stories are ours to bear alone, some burdens don't need to be shared. Even with those we love most. I think he knew there was something more, a shadow in my past greater than what I had revealed, but he respected my silence, my boundaries. What matters is not what happened to you. He said, it's what you did with what happened, and what I did was transform my trauma into purpose, my pain into service to others, my story into hope for those who were still in the midst of the nightmare. Not out of altruism. At first, helping other women was also a way of helping myself, of healing my own wounds. Over time, it became something bigger, a commitment to change that transcended my personal experience. Losing Carlos in 2015 was the hardest blow I had faced since my mother's death. We were so happy together, we had built so much that it seemed impossible to go on without him. A massive stroke took him one Sunday morning, while we were having coffee on the balcony of the apartment where we had moved after he retired, without pain, without prolonged suffering, as he deserved to leave after a life so full of kindness. In the months that followed, I rediscovered the strength I didn't know I had. The same resilience that had helped me survive the bathroom in the backlands, tuberculosis, and so many other challenges, now helped me to continue without half of my heart. I kept working. For a few more years, the university center, the shelter, the lectures, the consulting. But little by little it became clear that it was time to pass the baton to younger generations. There were now so many brilliant women following in my footsteps. Psychologists, lawyers, social workers, police officers, teachers, many of whom I had helped to educate. It was time to let them lead. When I turned 70 in 2017, I officially retired. They organized a surprise party that brought together hundreds of people, colleagues, former students, women who had passed through the shelter, children, now adults, whom we had helped to protect, all people whose lives had in some way been touched by the work to which I had dedicated my life. It was at that moment, seeing all those faces, hearing all those thank yous, that I finally understood the full meaning of those words my mother whispered on her deathbed. You have freed yourself. Now you must live. Life for both of us. I had lived, yes. Not just survived, but truly lived. And not just for me and my family. Mother, but for all the women who had no chance to escape, who did not find help in time, who were unable to rewrite their stories, as I was able to rewrite mine. After retiring, I made a decision that surprised many friends in Sao Paulo. I returned to Garanhuns, not to the countryside, of course. That place with its dark memories probably no longer existed. But to the city, which had grown and modernized in the half-century since I left it. I bought a simple but comfortable little house near the central square. I opened a small craft shop, more as an excuse to have a place to welcome people than out of financial necessity. There, among the lace and embroidery made by women from the region, many of them rescued from situations of violence through a social project that I helped to implement, I sit every day and talk to whoever wants to. The people of the city know me as Dona Dorinha from the square, the white-haired lady who tells stories, who listens without judging, who always has a word of comfort. Few know my complete journey, the published books, international lectures, pioneering work in Sao Paulo, and even fewer know the deepest secret of that bathroom in the backlands, of those bodies buried in a backyard that probably no longer exists. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, looking at the stars through the window, I still think about that day, not with guilt. That emotion is long gone. I think about it with a kind of calm acceptance. I did what I had to do to survive and then used my survival to help others not have to do the same. Life has this strange way of creating meaning, even from the most painful experiences. What seems like an unbearable curse can, with time and work, become a blessing, not only for us, but for others. Our deepest wounds, when healed, can become sources of healing for the world around us. If you, my dears, who have followed me this far, take away any lesson from my story, let it be this: the past marks us, but it does not define us. We can choose how to use our scars, whether to perpetuate the pain or to recognize and heal the pain of others. We can be shaped by the violence we suffer or by the strength we discover to overcome it. The choice is difficult, the path is long, but it is a possible choice. Today, at 78 years old, I look back with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Awe for the child who survived against all odds. Gratitude for the life I was able to build from the rubble of what was taken from me. I don't know how much longer I have left in this world, but I know that each day is a victory over those who tried to destroy me. Each smile is an act of resistance. Each moment of peace is proof that in the end they did not win. I won. I not only survived, but I flourished and helped others do the same. I also ask, with an open heart, that you like this video, subscribe to the channel and, most importantly, join our WhatsApp group. The link is in the description below. There we share real stories daily of other women who, like me, carry invisible scars, but found their way back to the light. Each story shared is a hand extended to someone who may be going through the same thing right now, feeling alone like I did in that bathroom all those years ago. Life is not easy for anyone, my loves. We all carry our burdens, whether visible or not. But if we can share the weight, if we can reach out to one another, if we can transform our pain into purpose, well, therein lies the true miracle of human existence, the ability to rebuild from scratch, to rise from one's own ashes, to find light even in the deepest darkness. I am Donna Doranha from the Square and this was my story. Thank you for listening to me with such affection and respect.